What people think. When I first set out that talk title, it was like, what people think, ... So of course, y'all know, what people think is none of my business. I thought the same thing. But of course, can't just have an obvious talk title out there. There's got to be some kind of twist to it. There has to be something else that I meant by that. So I'll figure it out as we go along. I'll let you know what that is. No, on a serious note, in our work this month, as we read the book, The Gifts of Imperfection, as we open ourselves up to the words of Brené Brown, Dr. Brené Brown, and really embrace the ideas and thoughts that come from what she calls wholehearted living, we begin to look at the divine humanity, the divine human being. Because we know for sure that we're more than just this, flesh suit walking around. We know that we are spiritual beings. We know that right where we are, God is. We know that God is living in, through, and as each and every one of us. And as we have this divine human experience, one of the great things that we have is the capacity to think. And most of the time, we forget that our thinking and that our thoughts are creative and that they're powerful. One of my mentors, Reverend Michael Beckwith, he talks about being aware of our thoughts. He goes, you got to be careful with, those things that you think, because you just don't know where that thought came from. It could have came from anywhere. And if we indeed begin to have a thought, a repetitive thought over and over again, it becomes our belief. And if it becomes our belief, then it becomes a law onto our life. Meaning that because we begin to believe certain things, we simply unconsciously begin to live as if it is true. I have a dear friend of mine who always tells me, when things happen to us as children, we learn something from it, and we form a thought and a belief. And then as we grow up, unless we change the belief, or unless we have a new experience and have a different way of looking at it, or develop a new belief, we are actually allowing ourselves to be run by a 5-year-old or by a 10-year-old, because we're still believing the stuff that we learned way back when that might have been true then, but certainly is not the truth of our life today. In reading this week, Brené Brown, she talks a little bit about this sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging that I'd like for us to entertain today is really about looking at our self-worth. What people think is none of our business is what we've heard. And yet, so many times, we color our whole coloring book based upon what's in fashion, what colors are out. Black is the new pink, pink is the new black, and we just follow the trends, and yet we constantly go by what other people think. Ain't that right? And yet, as spiritual people, we have an opportunity to recognize what is the truth of our own life. And we get to put value and worth on our own life. And we get to recognize the worth and the value of all life. This week, in looking at this sense of belonging, she talks about it. She says, belonging is the innate human desire to be a part of something larger than us. But she also talks about how people want to fit in. I want to fit into this group right here. I see a group of people and I want to fit in. I want to be like them. I want to do what they do in order to fit in. And yet, this natural sense of belonging is not about fitting in. It's not about changing who I am so that I can fit into this particular group. Yet, it seems that maybe American cosmology, being an individual, being a part of this elite group, or, to keep up with the Joneses. I'm dating myself when I say that, right? Keeping up with the Joneses? Like, who are they? Living in a certain area, doing certain things that we want to fit into that crowd. I remember listening to Sunny Day. We were talking earlier today, and she was telling me a story about a friend of hers who was going to a meeting in Naples. Naples seems to be the more affluent part of Long Beach, which is where we live. And her friend was saying, wow, I'm going to a meeting in Naples. And I get to hang out with these women, that go to this meeting at noon in the middle of the day on Friday in Naples. And it was almost like, wow, when I get there, I will feel like I have arrived. And I will be with these, women, these elite women from this great part of Long Beach that's rich, and I will finally feel like I belong. How many of us have had that experience? Maybe there's a certain club or a country club, or maybe there's a certain group, or maybe, it could even be like, wow, I'm going to be graduating and I'm going to be a practitioner and I get to be part of that group. I mean, it seems to always be a sense of, wow, I get to do something or be something, but I get to belong and I get to feel like I'm a part of something finally. And yet this innate sense of belonging, every research that I did over the week in looking at this sense of belonging constantly said that it's part of our DNA to want to belong, to have this desire to be part of something larger. And yet, the sincere sense of belonging is not about changing who I am to fit in. But indeed, the spiritual sense of belonging, that we actually are one, that we are one, that we belong to each other, because that living presence, that indwelling presence is God. That part of God that is in each and every one of us. So no wonder we want to belong to something bigger, because we already are. We already are, and that we don't have to change or do or manipulate or do anything to belong to each other, to belong to the divine humanity, to belong to God, to belong to this I am self that is our life. I guess the question for me is, where are the places where we don't belong? Or where are the places sometimes where we feel that we don't belong? And what is that about? Is it about our self-worth? Brené Brown talks about, she says, the greatest challenge for most of us is believing that we're worthy now. A lot of times we feel we belong because it's like, yeah, I've earned my place here, or this is my family, and I belong here. There's this sense of self-worth, of this value of who I am. And yet, she talks about, for a lot of us, that we don't feel that we're worthy now. We feel like we have to overcome these barriers in order to feel worthy enough to belong. And you don't have to raise your hand if you identify. You know who you are. You can just say amen. No, you know. But she says worthiness doesn't have prerequisites. And so many of us have knowingly created, or maybe even unknowingly allowed them to be handed down to us, where people make us feel that we have to be worthy of love, of belonging, of simply being this divine human that we are. She says that, you know, the long list includes like, well, I'll be worthy when I lose 20 pounds. Or I'll be worthy if I can get pregnant. I'll be worthy if I can stay sober or get sober. I'll be worthy if everybody thinks I'm a good parent. Or I'll be worthy if I get good grades. Or I'll be worthy when I make partner in the law firm. Or when I get my parents' approval, I'll be worthy. No matter what it is that we put in front of us to kind of say, I've arrived, or I'll be worthy when this happens. The key is that that's all. It's just man-made stuff to keep us separate from one another, to keep us from really knowing our truth, that right where you are, God is, that right where I am, God is, and that's enough, that we belong to each other. I remember growing up watching Sesame Street. How many people watch Sesame Street? Right? Now, this might just be me, but I think that we've taken this song a little bit too far. One of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. Can you tell which thing is not like the other before I finish this song? And of course, it's a great little ditty tune to teach children, here's some circles and here's a big square. The square doesn't belong with the circles. But I think what has happened in our society too many times is that we've taken this little song and said, hey, that square doesn't belong with the circles. But instead of just keeping it to squares and circles or shapes and colors, we've started to put it on people. Oh, you don't make as much money as I do. You don't belong. Sorry. Oh, you weren't born here in this country. Oh, sorry, you don't belong. Or, oh, we don't have the same skin complexion. Sorry, you don't belong. Because we're different. And when we think about whether or not we've participated in behavior like this, or whether we've noticed it or not, the truth is that in our divine humanity, we belong to each other. And it is incumbent upon us to recognize and to have self-worth, to know the truth of who we are, so that when we're confronted with situations like that, we can just simply come from a place of love and know that no matter what circles I may be in, no matter where I go, this is God presenting itself to God. Whether God recognizes it or not, I belong to you and you belong to me. And it is incumbent upon each of us to then treat each other with such love and such adoration, to value one another, whether or not folks see our value, whether they see their own value, whether they recognize that we belong to each other or not. It is incumbent upon us as spiritual people to know this truth for ourselves. It is important for us to take that list and tear it up and put it down the drain. It is incumbent upon us to release all those ideas that I'll be worthy when. It is incumbent upon us to know that people don't have to change in order to belong to us in our hearts and in our minds. And for us to recognize that God, that indwelling presence that is living in, through, and as me is that same God that is living in, through, and as each and every one of us. We belong to one another. And yet when I'm not feeling like I deserve it or that I've done my work to be there, it's so easy to put up the barriers. Sometimes it's not easy to love the bully. Sometimes it's not easy to love that person who's just being mean and outright ornery. Sometimes it's not easy to feel like we belong with people and individuals who don't recognize us or treat us kindly. But if we are to live wholeheartedly, especially as Brené Brown suggests, it is incumbent upon us to know our worth, to know our value. And as spiritual people, when I know my value, I can't help but to recognize your value as well, because we are one. So it is impossible for me to know my worth without knowing your worth. Yes. Because of our oneness, because of this truth. And the way that happens is by engaging in our spiritual practice. It is by simply remembering our truth over and over and over and over again. It is through our affirmation. It is through our meditation, through our prayer work, that we get to remember the truth of who we are. And as we remember the truth of who we are, we get to know beyond the shadow of a doubt the truth of one another, and to really know that we absolutely belong to one another. That there is no one that is less than us, and there is no one that is greater than us. That there's this oneness, that there's this divine humanity. Yes, it's true though. Some of us know it a little bit more than others. And yes, it's true that some days I know this truth more than other days. There are days that I forget. And that's exactly why we come to spiritual community. That's exactly why we make phone calls. That's exactly why we have practitioners that we see on a regular basis. You know, our spiritual coaches. So that we might remember this truth. That's exactly why we have Post-it notes. You know, those Post-it notes that say, remember to pray. And sometimes, you know, for me, I think, and I play a game with it, sometimes I think that mean people, meaning the people who are acting in a mean way, are kind of my human Post-it notes. You know, that when people are mean, it's just a reminder for me to be kind. Because I see before me what I don't want to be. I see before me an opportunity to bring love and kindness. I see an opportunity to bring the joy of God into that situation. So if you go around calling mean people or people who are mean your human Post-it notes, it's okay. And it's not always that easy. I mean, let's face it. Life is always in session. There's always something happening. There's always opportunities. There's always things going on. Yet we have the opportunity to stay very conscious and very aware of what's happening. Because it's so easy to just go on autopilot and just kind of, I've done it. I'm driving and I finally arrive and I get there and I kind of go, how did I get here? Like, I don't remember stopping at the stoplights or the stop signs. Sometimes we do. We just kind of get there and it's like, whoa, was I that hypnotized by life? Yeah, and it happens. So it's okay to be gentle with ourselves, right? To be gentle with ourselves and to know. But to come back to that place of, oh, yes. Oh, yeah. It's interesting because there's so many of us that call this place home. And as I've been coming here since the beginning of the year, I call this place home. And it's a wonderful feeling to feel like there's a place for me. There's a place where I can come. I don't have to perform and I could just be me. It makes that connection to last week's talk, right? Where we practice our courage and connection and compassion, where we can simply come to spiritual community and just be. Whether it's that we're crying because we're experiencing a hurt, or we're scared, or whether we're just feeling this overwhelming love. But when we have an opportunity to call someplace home, it is indeed such a gift. Because we don't have to do any people pleasing. We don't have to make believe we're somebody that we're not. We can just simply be. I tend to think that life is really supposed to be about being at home in our minds, in our bodies, in our spirits, in any space, all the time. Where we have that freedom to simply be. And to know that there's this connection. I guess the question for us for this week, and the challenge for this week in our spiritual practice from this week to next week is not only how is it that I myself can feel like I belong everywhere that I go and everywhere that I am, but indeed, how do I help others feel like they belong? Am I a welcoming place? When someone comes before me, am I noticing the value in that individual? Do I give that person my undivided attention? Is my heart a welcoming space so that others feel like they belong? And if not, how can I allow myself to love so deeply, to love so unabashedly? Well, what did that bumper sticker say, Mary? Oh gosh. Not unreservedly, but just like unafraid, like just living full out. How can I just live full out from a place of love where I help others to feel that love, that they are so important to me, that they are right here in my heart, that they have a place, that they belong to me, that their heart is in my hand? How is it then that I help others feel like we belong to each other? Because it's not enough for me just to feel like, okay, I have privilege, or anywhere that I go, I belong. It's like, yeah, I belong here at Seaside. Yeah, I belong, wherever I go in my house. I belong with my friends, and there's that sense of belonging. But then it's really about, where am I, and how is it that I also am that place of belonging, where people feel like they belong right here, where they feel valued and worthy, where they can have all of my love, every last drop of it. I'm gonna close with this idea that, people from all different races and cultures have different ideas about the word belonging and belonging. And in some South African culture, there's this word called Ubuntu. And I know some of you have heard it before. But it's this world cosmology that says, I belong, therefore I am. I belong, therefore I am. And isn't that true for all of us? That the truth is whether we feel that we belong or not, because of who we are, our birthright, because we are God right where we are, because God is living in, through, and as us, we already belong. We already belong. So we start from that place of I belong, therefore I am. Therefore I am. I belong, and that great I am presence is here. And that great I am presence is here for you, in, through, and as you, but for you. Because we absolutely belong to each other. And when we belong to each other, and when we care for one another, when we love unabashedly, when we're so just out there in this place of love, of self-worth, of value, when we recognize that God presence in each and every one of us, we recognize that we truly, truly belong to one another. So as the invitation is right now to simply clear your laps, as we take our music, our reading, our prayer, as we take this particular message into some quiet time, let us simply allow the music to carry us into a deepening and a deeper knowing of our life as that life that God is. Because as we truly begin to recognize our life as the life that God is, we begin to recognize that God is all, and that everything and everyone is that beautiful life that God is. And that in actuality we belong to life itself, that we belong to each other, that innate sense of being a part of something larger is indeed our truth. That something larger is that great I am presence, is God. And that as we belong to each other, we become welcoming spaces for each other's hearts, and we become a welcoming space for our own heart. So we simply allow ourselves to open up to a greater idea of belonging to one another, of valuing one another, of being present for one another and for ourselves, and especially to knowing our life as the life of God.